Pakatan Rakyat government, and right now I'm working in a market research consultancy. So I'll talk a bit about some of the things that we do in market research which relates to the film. But tonight I'm going to just focus on 5 points. I understand I only have 5 minutes, so that's 1 point per minute. That's great. So I'm going to talk about, number 1, the role of consultants. Number 2, marketing and branding. Number 3, popular versus effective leadership. Number 4, promises versus what's actually delivered, and as well as the implementation of that. And number 5, controllable versus uncontrollable factors. What are the things within elections that couldn't be controlled at all, and relate that to the Malaysian context as well. So number 1, the role of consultants. I think the first thing that you see when you start off with the documentary is that you see these young people speaking in English, seated around the table with these old politicians who are quiet, they're just listening, and they're not quite sure whether do I follow the instructions and the advice of these consultants? But I have to, because they're chosen by my boss, right? And it's sort of an exporting an American-style politics, which I think the filmmaker also puts up there. Goni also says in the film, only in the US can you believe you can change people with information. Communication is important, but you have to take into account deep-seated fears in people. So does it mean to say that this kind of democracy only works in countries where the people want to hear information, people want to take the facts and figures apart, and it doesn't work in countries where people don't want to listen to information? And how do you relate that to a country like here in Malaysia? Do we want information, or actually do we respond to things which are more emotional? And I think the role that consultants play is very interesting. I mean, in Malaysia, we are quite cynical, right, about these foreign consultants. I mean, we've had several cases in which we have been very critical. One was the APCO fiasco, where the federal government has been using these foreign consultants, and in fact, the opposition was accusing the federal government of employing a consultant that was Jewish, and then there was a whole ruckus within parliament associated to that. And then if you look at our Pemandu in federal government, they are full of consultants. The ETP, the GTP, they are basically using a lot of external consultants, paying them a lot of money to conduct groups and discussions, sometimes even bringing people in from foreign countries. So you kind of wonder, who are the ones writing the current economic plans for the country? Okay, so that's the first point of the role of consultants. Now, secondly, it's about marketing and branding. There was a term that was used, like spin doctors, and we all know that politics is based on spin doctoring. Both sides employ that, both government and opposition here. I'm going to read something, just a short paragraph. So, capitalism, although in its purest form, is meant to be based on the belief that human beings are perfectly capable of forming their own decisions based on a set of incentives, most usually economic. This usually results in something quite the opposite. So the fact is, and just think about your current day capitalism, material consumerism is a lot less dependent upon the content's value as it is on the marketing and branding associated with the content, right? Think about the clothes that you're wearing, the books that you've bought recently. And this notion has spilled into the spheres of politics, as we can see in the documentary, where it is now the flashiest of campaigns, the most beguiling of politicians, the most emotional of messaging that hits home in this sort of supermarket culture of capitalistic politics. So what I'm saying is that what we're used to in the real world, you go to the supermarket, you can see all kinds of products flashing your way. It's a free market of products, of brands. You also get that now. We are used to now trying to be wooed over by the politicians. Barisan says this, Pakatan says that, and it's up to you as a consumer. So you become a consumer of politics. Which idea can I buy the best? Which one is the one that appeals to me the most? And the problem with that is, I understand that ultimately it boils down to the individual decision maker, but the problem with that is that it's so dependent on advertising, on branding, on who has the more resources and who has more money to put together these really nice ads, short YouTube clips, the best websites that are going to target you and then make you think, oh, okay, this party has done very well and this is what I want to vote for. So I work in market research, so I'm critical of it, but yet maybe I'm hypocritical because I am working in that industry. So what do? We invite people to come for focus group discussions, we have long interviews with you, we ask people, why do you like this product, why do you like this color of the brand, this packaging, you know, which part of the little child laughing appealed to you most? and this is being used by politicians as well. So, you know, right now where we're sitting here, you know, goodness knows who is out there trying to talk to people on the streets, doing opinion polls, you know, all these polls that come out all the time, Merdeka Center Research, and a lot more private paid polls which we don't hear about. All this is going on because they want to know exactly what appeals to the voter the most. Okay, someone said in the documentary, oh, that's too cold, you know, it's not emotional enough. And then the consultant said, you guys are paying us so much money to tell you just 3 words: relevant, simple, and repetitive, right? Now, again, the problem with playing an emotional political game is that you see it happening in Malaysia, where what is the most emotional thing that politics can do? To run on the politics of fear, right? Politics of fear and insecurity, and that's precisely what we've seen. I mean, we know for sure that race and religion are the things that are used to hit home to your heartstrings, to your fears and to your insecurities. And I mean, I see that as a problem. Okay, third point, popular versus effective. So focus groups can tell you a lot of things. For example, people actually said, there's no work, where are we going to get the money? We don't want our country to sell our gas, but they are not listening, meaning the government is not listening. And yet, what did Goni do? He went ahead and he did decide to export gas. Goni also went ahead to increase taxes. So why did he actually do something which was quite the opposite of what the people wanted? His answer was this, which you heard earlier. He said, I don't have time to meet the people. I don't want to be popular. I want to be a good president. I mean, I'm not sure whether we see signs of that happening today. For example, when Najib tries to be this economically progressive prime minister, and he says, no more subsidies, you know, the country cannot survive any longer. We have to remove gas subsidies. We have to remove subsidies for rice and essential items. I mean, I leave that to you. We can discuss it later. Is he doing something that is actually effective for the country in the long run, so that the country doesn't have economic debt in the future? But yet, there are people who are disagreeing with that because, you know, we feel that even if the country saves money, it's going to use it for corrupt means. And that's a whole different story altogether, because there's leakage and there's a great level of corruption. And I found it interesting that the consultant actually expressed he expressed frustration with Goni at one point. You know, the skinny guy, I don't know what his name was, but the one with the funny kind of smile, it's like kind of sinister smile. He was quite, he praised Goni throughout the whole thing, right? He said that, oh, there's nothing to do with him, you know, maybe it's us as the consultants which didn't help him out. But at one point there was a very small hesitation when he expressed frustration that Goni wasn't actually listening, you know, he wasn't listening to the people. So I think the trick is, how do you balance between popular support and doing the unpopular things, but sometimes necessary for the country? Okay, fourth point is about promise versus implementation. I think right from the start, he promised quite a lot of things, when he won the elections, he promised jobs, right? He kept saying jobs, 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 that's the first thing. And then after that, hardly 2 years later, or even 1.5 years later, he had to resign and step down as a president. Now, why was that? I actually thought of the Malaysian context of Pak La, you know, when he came in, and he came in strong, you know, much stronger than when Goni came in. He promised that he was going to eradicate corruption, and he was seen as the clean image prime minister, right? This is during the 2004 elections. So sometimes perhaps there's a danger of over-promising at the campaign level, right? Leading to people's rejection when you are not able to deliver within, say, like the first year or so. Okay, the other problem about doing these polls and market research, I feel, is that politicians go to this level of seeing who is going to be statistically significant. So you're going to interview people, you're going to see who counts, whose vote is actually going to count, and I'm going to make decisions based on that vote. So in the context of Malaysia, does the Indian vote count as much? Does the Orang Asli vote count as much? And if you have any friends who are political consultants, you ask them, when you do focus groups and you do opinion polls, have you included the minority groups in your polls? And more likely than not, the minority groups won't be included. I can be quite sure of that, because they don't count statistically. They're not going to lend enough weight to your eventual electoral campaign. Okay, and my final point, what is controllable? And as I talk about these points that were raised in the documentary, you can think about it in the Malaysian context as well. So number one is about the divisions in the country. So of course in Malaysia we're divided by so many things. Ethnicity, religion, culture, language, geography, urban versus rural. To what extent can politicians control these factors as a factor of voting? Secondly, this thing about the jobs that were lost, he said that 95% of our jobs are owned by locals. What are these people talking about? But yet the perception was that it's overwhelmingly owned and occupied by the foreigners. So we don't know what the truth is, and the documentary doesn't tell us, it doesn't tell us what was the truth, but it tells us what he thought, and it tells us what the people thought. So how can you control perception? And over here there are so many things that can be blurred because of things like media and alternative media as well. What else? Okay, there's that famous line, of course, he says, campaigns are like intercourse, you have no control over when you peak, right? So how can you control the sort of emotions that are going to change on a daily basis? And finally, when nobody was in charge of the country, this utter state of chaos when people were banging down the doors, throwing stones at the glass doors, and he wasn't responding at all. So I was also just thinking, what would happen in Malaysia, for example, if something were to happen during the elections? And it's interesting, Muhyiddin was just in Canberra, I think yesterday. And one of my colleagues asked him, as the Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia, would you, on behalf of the Malaysian government, guarantee that the Barisan National Government will not resort to force to retain power? And will you guarantee that the government will not declare emergency before the general election or after the general election to circumvent the people's will? And he went along like a long roundabout way, and his eventual answer was that we are a responsible government. Okay. He also referred to 1969 when in the 13th May riots, and he said that, it was the opposition who started it. The government didn't do anything. Blah, blah, blah. So that was his response, and I'm not saying anything, but I'm just throwing it out as a point of discussion. Just comparing what had happened then and what has happened, or what could possibly happen here. That's all, but the final thing I wanted to say is that some of the protests that took place in Bolivia at the time were because people were unhappy about the privatization of water, and that relates very much to what's happening here. Some of you might have known about the water protests that took place in Malaysia a year ago. And it's still ongoing. I mean, the issue hasn't been resolved yet. It's about how water also has been privatized, and there's been a call to renationalize it because people are not happy with the way Shabazz has handled the matter. Okay, that's all. Thank you.